everybody. Thank you for joining me. Today, I thought I would spend a bit of time discussing uh, the sad truth about happiness, 8 secrets for leading the good life. And the reason why I'm taking the opportunity to do so now is because the hardcover came out last July, but I'm delighted to report that the paperback was just released yesterday. So I'm really, really hoping that if you love my work, if you appreciate my work, if you like my writing, you'll give this book a shot. It's done reasonably well, but not nearly as well as Parasitic Mind. Uh, I guess there are several reasons for that. One of which is through no fault of my own. What happened is that the publisher that was publishing my book, Regnery, which is a probably the most famous conservative imprint in the United States, uh, was bought over by Skyhorse Publishing, and so and the sale, the chaos was happening at exactly the time that my book was originally released. I think it was July 25th of last year. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks before my book was to be released, the digital marketer of Regnery left. And then also about 2 weeks before my book was released last July, the the in-house publicist who takes care of, promoting my book, also left. And so it was a complete chaos. Things fall through the cracks. And so in a sense, I've got a second chance to release the book because it's being released. But by the way, not all books, very few books, uh, get released from hardcover to paperback. Usually they do if they've done well. And so, if you really love my work, I don't know how much it costs, maybe 18 bucks. Get out there and get it because it really is a fun book. Very, very different from The Parasitic Mind. The Parasitic Mind is what happens to human minds when they're parasitized by dreadful ideas. Whereas, in a sense, this is the flip side. What happens to people's lives if they make good decisions, if they adopt, positive and hopeful mindsets? Now, so maybe I'm just going to maybe spend a few minutes talking about each of these chapters. And in no way should you think that my giving you the synopsis means that I've given you uh, the full story. They really, I mean, what's really, I think, fun about the book is that it is a mix of my personal history dealing with happiness. What are some of my own secrets for, why I'm happy, coupled with ancient wisdoms and backed up by contemporary science. Some of you may have heard me say this, so I'll start with why I wrote this book. If you would have asked me when I finished The Parasitic Mind and when it was getting first published in 2020, what would be my next book, I would have been hard pressed to tell you, oh, my next book is going to be a book on happiness. What ended up, exciting me about the prospect of writing a book on happiness is, well, a couple of reasons, and I guess that's chapter one, where the chapter's titled "On Being the Happy Professor." I explain, why I wrote the book, and so maybe I'll just summarize a few of the points from that chapter. So I would receive tons of messages, both public messages and private emails and private messages and DMs from people saying, you deal with so many difficult issues, so many contentious, controversial, thorny issues, and that you always seem to be playful, always seem to be happy, and hence people started calling me the happy professor and the happy warrior, the happy honey badger. What's your secret? Why are you so happy? Tell us what's your secret to being so playful and happy? So that was the first thing that sort of put the idea of writing a book on happiness on my radar. And then also I noticed that so I operate as an academic, I operate in what's called descriptive world, right? So in other words, as a psychologist, consumer psychologist, evolutionary psychologist, uh, I deal with describing behavior. Why do people do the things that they do? And prescriptive world would be much more, say, what Jordan Peterson does, which is, he's a clinical psychologist, and so he's prescribing behavior. This is what you ought to do to get over this particular, mental ailment. And so, having always operated much more in descriptive world, I never thought that, okay, I'll write a happiness, which is a lot more prescriptive. But then whenever I would post something that was prescriptive in nature, where I'm giving people some advice about how to be an author, how to be a good scientist, how to be a good spouse, whatever, uh, that would be some of the material that would most resonate with people. People would write to me after saying, "Oh my God, you don't know how much that helped me." So, for example, if I said, here are the secrets to how I lost 86 pounds, which I did, and people would say, "Oh my God, that was the most impactful thing that I've ever. You don't know how much it helped me. I ended up, implementing your regimen, and I lost 40 pounds, and it wouldn't have happened had I not listened to you." And so I thought, okay, well, do I have what it takes to actually write a book that is uniquely fresh? And the reason why I'm saying that is because you probably know that the topic that has been most covered by philosophers through the ages is on the prescription on how to live the good life, right? I mean, certainly the ancient Greeks spent quite a bit of time. There's a whole bunch of schools of philosophy from ancient Greece that are all about what is the optimal way to live a meaningful, purposeful, good life. And so I thought, okay, well, do I have the chutzpah, the hubris to be able to actually add to that pantheon of millennia of knowledge? And so at first I was, a bit concerned, but then I thought, okay, well, my personal story is unique, right? And if I couple that with those ancient wisdoms and backed up by contemporary science, then I can have hopefully something fresh. And so that's what led me to write the book. Okay, so then in chapter 2, I get into some. So the title of that chapter is Ancient and Modern Wisdom Regarding the Good Life. So what I do there is I talk a bit about some of the ancient wisdoms. Here come this, the Stoics and their philosophy. By the way, some of you may know that the Stoics, in a very direct sense, were preaching cognitive behavior therapy before we had a name for it in clinical psychology, right? I mean, the more I dug deep into ancient Greek philosophy, which I already knew quite a bit about it, but then in writing this book, I did a much deeper dive. And some of you may have heard me mention the story. I mean, every single time I would think, oh my God, I just came up with this brilliant insight, unique, fresh insight. Then I would find out, oh, Seneca already said this 2,000 years ago. Oh, Epictetus already said this 2,000 years ago. So it was really quite astonishing, if not humbling, to see the extent to which these guys, without having the tools of what we would today call the scientific method, were able, through observation and through internal inspection and philosophizing and logic and rationality, were able to come up with insights that, of course, have proven to be true across millennia. And so what I do in that chapter is I discuss some of these. Here comes Seneca, here comes Epictetus, here comes Aristotle, and so on. But then, of course, I back these up with contemporary science, from positive psychology, from happiness studies, from neuroscience, from social psychology, demonstrating how many of these ancient wisdoms are certainly backed up by contemporary science and so on. So that's what takes place in chapter 2. Then in chapter 3, titled Key Life Decisions, the Right Life Partner and the Ideal Job, what I'm basically arguing there is that there really are two fundamental decisions that you'll make that will either impart the most amount of happiness in your life or the most amount of misery. Now, few people would be surprised to know, hey, no kidding, if you marry the right person, that's great. And if you have a job that gives you purpose and meaning, that's great. Sure. Well, first, it's important to point out that of all possible decisions, these two are truly the ones that are going to give you the most bang for your buck. But of course, the devil is in the details. How do you make those decisions, right? I should mention that I make it clear throughout the book that unlike many, prescriptive folks and self-help gurus and life coaches and so-called clinical psychologists and so on, uh, I have the epistemic humility to simply tell you that I'm going to make you statistical arguments. In other words, there is no guarantee in anything that I say other than, yes, of course, it's backed up by science, it's backed up by ancient wisdoms, it's backed up by my personal life trajectory. But life is a statistical game, right? So I could tell, if I'm a physician, I could tell you, look, don't smoke and you greatly reduce your chances of lung cancer. That doesn't mean that non-smokers don't get cancer, right? But you certainly are playing the right odds if you don't smoke, right? And so any prescription that I offer in this book, and please, I truly, yeah, but believe me, I make like $1.50 or something for every book that is sold. So it's not so much. I mean, yes, it's nice to make money, but it's that I want the book to be read by as many people as possible because it truly is a fun book. After I published the book, I'm very protective over who reads my book, and even my wife didn't read an early draft of my book. She only read it when it was published, and I remember she went to the cafe, she devoured it. When she finished it, she had tears in her eyes and said, "My God, it was such a fun book, such a great book, so many amazing anecdotes." So I'm telling you, you'll enjoy it. So please give it a shot, and hopefully we can get a viral moment going. But in any case, when I'm talking about statistical regularities, what I'm saying is, look, I can't guarantee you that the person that you choose you're going to be forever happy with, and I can't guarantee you that the job that you choose is the absolute optimal one that would bring you maximal happiness. But boy, I can offer you some guidelines that will greatly augment the likelihood of you hitting the bullseye. So let me discuss very quickly each of these. And again, the fact that I'm telling you the synopsis, in no way should you think that you've gotten the key gist of the book. You really need to read all the fun stories, the jokes, the personal stories, and it's really fun. Anyways, so when it comes to choosing the right life partner in evolutionary psychology, you've got two uh, if you like, opposing maxims. There is the birds of a feather flock together, and then there's the opposites attract. And you've probably heard in just everyday, parlance, or people say, oh, opposites attract is a lot sexier, it's more fun, you're the yin to my yang, and so on. Well, opposites attract is a great thing for short-term mating, right? I may be sexually restrained and I may be an introvert. You may be sexually adventurous and outgoing, and that mix might actually make for a great, sexual dalliance behind the shed. But if we're talking about maximizing the long-term probability of success of a marriage, then it's overwhelmingly, the research is unequivocal, it's overwhelmingly the case that birds of a feather flock together. Now, flock together on which dimensions? I mean, right? We're not trying to marry someone who has similar eye color to us. When we're talking about birds of a feather flock together here, we're referring to uh, shared values, shared belief system, shared life goals, right? The obvious example I give is, let's suppose that I score very highly on religiosity, so that much of my daily life is guided by a personal relationship with my God, and my spouse happens to be a caustic atheist. Well, it doesn't guarantee that we won't be happy together, but boy, are you putting the odds against us, because on a fundamental issue, we seem to disagree. And so, yes, it's nice to romanticize the love conquers all, but it doesn't. As I said, life is a statistical game, and so you need to play the proper odds. So if you marry someone with whom you share many of these assortative cues, like belief systems, like life attitudes, like moral codes, then boy, are you increasing your chances of being married. And there I talk about things like, for example, the neuroanatomy of physical attraction. I mean, yes, it's It's normal when we first are in love, we get the tingling thing in our fingers and we get the butterfly in our stomach. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not sexually attracted to our partners 20 years later, but many of these physiological mechanisms, they wane. That doesn't mean that we don't want to be intimate with our long-term partner and so on, but it's not the same thing as when we first got together the first 3 months. So if physical attraction and the lust is what you think is going to get you through 50 years of marriage, then boy, have I got news for you. So okay, so when it comes to choosing the right life partner, we really want to go with birds of a feather flock together. Now, when it comes to the ideal job, I argue that there are two key metrics that you should aim for if possible. Now, I understand that not everybody has got the opportunity to implement these, in which case you could implement them after work. But let me just first give them to you. I work very, very long hours. I'm always working nonstop, but I don't feel like I'm working. Why? Because today I said, you know what? I feel like just connecting with folks. All right, let me call a X Spaces at 7:30. It wasn't this morning. I had no intention. I couldn't have told you that I was going to have a 7:30 X Spaces. I'm sure it'll end up being a couple of thousand people, right? And so I vagabond. I'm an intellectual. In French, you say flaneur. Flaneur is someone who kind of floats around. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't have a set schedule. I have many meetings. I've got to teach courses. I've got to meet graduate students. I've got to go to departmental meetings. I've got to meet editors. I've got to, whatever. There's a million meetings. But yet I still feel that for much of my time, I get to choose where I'm going to be and work on what. So the idea of having what I call temporal freedom is incredibly important. Now, contrast that with someone who works on the factory line, where the union mandates when you go for lunch, for how long you go for lunch, and when you take bathroom breaks. So even when I can relieve myself by going to the bathroom is mandated by someone else. Okay. Now, again, I don't mean to imply that all jobs are not any honest job has dignity in it, but I'm talking about when I have to ask you for permission to be able to take a break because I I seem to have to really need to go to the bathroom today because maybe I drank too much coffee. Well, then that's probably not as good as another person who can decide that, you know what, today I'm not feeling creative. I'm just going to go for a jog now. Which leads me to the second point. I mentioned the word creative. I argue in the book that anything that allows you to instantiate your creative impulse, by definition, is going to grant you more purpose and meaning, right? So, yes, being a managerial accountant is important, and being an insurance adjuster is great, and being a bus driver is wonderful. All jobs have value and are inherently dignified if you pursue them with honesty. But a stand-up comic, a chef, an architect, an author, they're doing something distinct in that until they came along, that great plate that the chef made, that great bridge that the architect created, that great book that the author wrote, that great stand-up routine that made people crack up for 2 hours didn't exist until that creator came along and created that, uh, that creation. And so there is something so uniquely satisfying in being able to immerse yourself in the creative process. So now the next thing you might say, well, yeah, sure, okay, great. It's easy for you, the fancy professor, to say, hey, you want a job that has temporal freedom and gives you creativity. But that came from the fact that I knew myself well, which I talk about this, by the way, in a later chapter where I talk about the old Delphic maxim, know thyself. I knew that I would not work well with the boss. I knew that I wanted to live a life of creativity. I knew that, I can't suffer from scheduling asphyxia, where every minute of every day is determined by someone else, that my fate is sealed. If I were a pilot and I'm doing the Montreal to Singapore flight, well, I know that I'm screwed. Once those doors are locked, I'm done. There's no floating around. I'm in that flying tube for the next 16 hours. And so Now you might say, okay, but what if I can't do that? Well, then there are still ways by which you can instantiate what I'm talking about. Let's suppose you're a bus driver, okay? Well, you could be a bus driver that views your job as driving from A to B and doing that route 8 times a day. That's it. You just carry people, you drive people from point A to B, you do that 8 times a day, that route, and you go home. Or you can view your job in part as an opportunity to strike up conversation with people as they come and sit on the bus. And the reason why I'm telling you this specific example is one time I was returning, I think I was coming back from New York City back to Ithaca. Ithaca is where Cornell University is. That's where I did my Masters of Science and PhD. And so I was returning. I can't remember if it was Albert. I think it was New York City. And so I was taking a bus, like one of those, Greyhound buses. And being someone who's extroverted, very sociable, and so on, I sat next to the bus driver, and we ended up having this incredibly intense and intimate conversation. I think the bus ride is probably about 4 hours, maybe 4.5 hours. And at the end of the conversation, as we came to Ithaca, a lady came up and said, I just want to thank you. And I turned, I said, thank me for what? I mean, I hadn't even talked to her. She goes, well, I couldn't help but hear how you and the bus driver were speaking to each other. And I just thought it was such a wonderful, uh, honest and warm conversation that I could be privy to. And just thank you for making the bus ride so nice. Well, that was very sweet, but it's the bus driver, in a sense, who granted me the opportunity to chat with him. Had he been closed off, had he not created that moment of intimacy for us to chat with each other, then I'm sure he doesn't remember me today. Although I remember that story enough to tell it to you 30 years later, probably 32 years. Must have been around midnight, maybe 92. So so there are ways by which we can still tackle our jobs in a way that might adhere to some of the prescriptions I'm offering. Okay, let's move on. Chapter 4. I hope, by the way, that this is exciting you to get the copy. I really, it, when I mean, to the point of creating, I mean, when you create something like a book, first of all, it's an incredibly, I mean, nothing could be more intimate, right? I mean, I would argue that, being a porn actor is less intimate than being an author, because when when you're an author, it's your mind and your soul that's naked in front of thousands of people, maybe millions of people, right? I'm sharing my deepest thoughts. I'm sharing stories from my personal life. I'm taking positions, right? So it's something that's very, very intimate. And that one day somebody sends you a selfie, they're sitting on a beach in Abu Dhabi, and they're saying, hey, Professor Saad, they tag you, look what I'm reading. And you're thinking, my God, there was a day 3 years earlier when I opened my laptop, opened the Word document, called it whatever, the parasitic mind, started striking the first letters, the first syllables. 12, 14 months later, I had a draft ready. I submit to the publisher. They give me some feedback. I make a couple of changes, submit the final version, goes to production, and then a year later, people are sending me selfies of them reading the book, or they send me a photo of their dog standing next to my book, or their cat, or their 1-year-old child. And when I'm seeing that, I'm not saying, "Oh my God, look, I just made money. I just made $3 off this book." It's the excitement that your ideas are being consumed by, I mean, think about a person who's going to the beach, and at that moment, there are 1 million other choices that they can make. And yet somehow, for that brief moment, your book won. They said, "Oh, let me take Gad Saad's book to the beach and read it now." My God, what a privilege. It's humbling that you can actually grab someone's attention for those minutes when they can have chosen a million other things. And so when I sort of implore you to give the book a shot, it's because I promise you it's a really, really fun book. And it's not because I wrote it. I truly think it's, some of my earlier books, let's say evolutionary psychology books. They're great books. They're wonderful to read, but they're more. I mean, at least several of them are very academic books. One of them, The Consuming Instinct, is meant for the general audience. That one is super fun. But this one, it's about happiness and well-being and how to choose a wife and how to have fun. So it's great. Anyways, so chapter 4 is titled The Sweet Spot, All Good Things in Moderation. And so here, let me go back to the ancient Greeks. Some of you have probably heard the golden mean. This is Aristotle's golden mean in his treatise, his Nicomachean Ethics, where he basically says, too little of something is not good, too much of something is not good, and the sweet spot's somewhere in the middle, hence the golden mean. So in his case, he talks about, let's say, you could have a really cowardly soldier. Well, you don't want a cowardly soldier that hides in a corner and sucks his thumb. On the other hand, you don't want the other end of the curve, someone who is so reckless in his risk-taking that they become a martyr because they take no precautions and very quickly they die. Somewhere in the middle between abject cowardice and reckless martyrdom is the sweet spot. Now, I argue in this chapter, ladies and gentlemen, that there is no universal law that is more powerful and ubiquitous than that inverted U. Inverted U means exactly that. It's the mathematical form of the too little of something is not good, too much of something is not good, and the best point, the optimum point, is somewhere in the middle. Hence, it looks like an inverted U. And I show in this chapter across a bewildering number of examples at the neuronal level, meaning how your brain operates, at the individual level, at the group level, at the societal level, that this universal law of the inverted U defines optimal performance, optimal flourishing, optimal happiness. So you might say, okay, but what do you mean? Give me an example. Well, let's take wine consumption. Well, it follows an inverted U. If you don't drink any wine, or if you drink too much wine, it's worse than drinking some moderate amount of wine. Let's talk about exercise intensity. If you exercise with too little intensity, it's not good. If you exercise with too much intensity, it's not good, for all sorts of reasons that we don't need to get into. And that it turns out that the optimal intensity level is somewhere in the middle. Let's talk about perfectionism, something that I suffer from greatly. If you're not in the least bit perfectionist in your work, well, what happens? Your work will suffer. Imagine you're an author and you don't really care about those pesky details about accuracy of references and so on. You don't check your work many times. Well, then you're going to have a million typos, a lot of citation errors, a lot of errors in your references. On the other hand, if you are on my end of the maladaptive curve, you're too perfectionist, you end up checking your work 9,733,000 times, where all you end up doing in your 74,000th pass is find one comma that was missing. So you wasted 3 days rereading the galley proofs of your book and you just found one typo. Maybe had you not done that last pass, you could have been thinking about the next book you should be working on. And so there is a law of diminishing return if you're too perfectionist, something that I've always suffered from. And so what I do in that chapter is I show that in our personal relationships, in our relationships with ourselves, in our relationship with others, in economic relationships, in relationships between countries, all human phenomena are guided by one universal law of optimal flourishing, and it's the inverted U. So, I mean, if you only read that chapter, it will be well worth the money that you might spend on the book. Okay, let's move on to chapter 5. Give me some kind of thumbs up. Are you enjoying this? Give me something. Are you having fun? It's hard to tell. I just see people coming in, quite a few people here, but I hope that people are enjoying this. By the way, after I finish this, I will eventually post, the taping of me speaking on my YouTube channel. Thanks, guys. Thank you for those who are doing thumbs up. Thank you. I appreciate it. And then I'll also post it on my podcast. It'll also be recorded, on the link on X. And If you want to ask me questions, I don't, as you see, I don't take questions here. First, there are too many people, and then it becomes very difficult to manage. One of the benefits that I give subscribers is that I create a thread in the subscriber only area where people can then post questions, and then up to 9 p.m. tonight, and then I will go and answer in writing those questions. So if you love my work, if you support my work, if you want to have access to exclusive content, I often will post book recommendations. I will post academic articles that I love for various reasons. So go, I can't remember how much it is, maybe $5 or $6 a month. You certainly get your money's worth. It's the equivalent of a latte. And I try to post 1, 2, 3 at least exclusive things per week. All right, so chapter 5, life as a playground. That was a really fun chapter to write. I mean, every chapter was fun, but by definition, since I'm talking about play, so I begin here by talking about the importance of play from an evolutionary perspective. And the reason, so for those of you who don't know, I'm an evolutionary behavioral scientist, right? I apply evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology to understand human phenomena. Well, play has been studied quite a bit by evolutionists, but certainly by evolutionary-minded zoologists who study play behavior in animals, but also studied by developmental psychologists who are evolutionary-minded. Why do children play? But of greater interest to what we're talking about here is we shouldn't think of play as something that you outgrow in the way that you no longer need your wisdom teeth, right? I mean, we no longer really, they're vestiges of an evolutionary past, and we no longer need to play. Once we reach adulthood, well, it's time to get serious. Nothing could be further from the truth. Play is an indelible part of our human nature. And by the way, speaking of earlier, this idea of birds of a feather flock together, there's actually some interesting studies that show that there's a scale called, I think, the adult playfulness scale or something to that effect. And people who assort on that scale end up having happier marriages, which makes sense. If I'm someone who's very much of a joker, I play around, I have fun, I prank you, I approach life with a twinkle in my eye. Now, if my spouse happens to be someone who's very sullen and caustic and acerbic, well, that's probably not going to work out. But if we both match one another on the adult playfulness scale, well, let the games begin. And so I tell actually some really personal stories in the book of my wife and I, where, one time I come and say I had lost a lot of weight, so my abs are starting to show. I go see my wife and I go, look at this body. And she looks at me and, doesn't say much. I said, well, boy, that doesn't sound like you're very impressed with my physique. She said, no, I'm just thinking about how, we'll need to get a bigger house in order to support your ever-growing ego, right? Well, that, we take shots at each other, we joke around, we hug it out, we have fun. I tease her, she teases me. We don't take ourselves too seriously. We're always joking. That's what makes life fun. That's what makes a marriage fun, is you've got, this best friend that you can, it's a forever play date, right? What could be more beautiful? And so, but in the chapter, I don't just talk about joking around. I basically argue that even very serious things can be construed as play. So science is a form of play, right? Because think about it this way. When you're creating a 1,000 piece puzzle, you're putting it together, right? Well, that's what science is. There are 1,000 variables out there, some of which are linked together, some of which are correlated, some of which cause each other. Well, now my job as a scientist is to come along and to be able to construct a puzzle that allows me to make sense of between, which variables are the predictor variables, which are the dependent variables, which are the causal variables. So one of the things that I love about my job as a professor is that whenever I start working on a research project, well, first, it's really fun to come up with a research topic. Oh, hey, I wonder why people do this. Let's try to construct a research question and try to study this. Okay, let's try to propose some hypotheses. Now you go out, you spend a couple of years developing the data collection tools. You collect the data. Now you analyze the data. The data didn't cooperate. It somehow didn't adhere to your positive hypothesis. What happened? Can we now think back why what we seemed was like a really reasonable expectation didn't work? So it's fun, it's exciting, right? So life as a playground is such an important mindset to adopt when you are just, yeah, I mean, life has difficulties, and boy, can you inoculate yourself against some of these difficulties if you can have fun and play. And I actually talk about examples of how, even in the most dire circumstances, me going through the Lebanese Civil War as a child, Holocaust people who went through the Holocaust, both they and I, in our respective dire circumstances, still had a need to play. There's a great book. I don't have the reference with me, but I cited in the book, whereby a scholar studied play behavior in the concentration camps. So I mean, imagine. I mean, even the movie Life is Beautiful, right? It was, I think, the 1997 Oscar-winning movie, was about how a father tries to protect his son in the concentration camps by trying to convince his son that all that he's seeing, all the horrors that he's seeing, is really just one gigantic game. So he's trying to protect the innocence of his child by turning the Holocaust into a game. Okay, let's move on to chapter 6. There are 9 chapters in total. Chapter 6 is titled Variety as the Spice of Life, and then in brackets, sometimes. Well, of course, the maxim, variety is the spice of life, is an old maxim. The reason why I put sometimes is because in many places, variety seeking is condoned, and in at least one case, it's condemned. If you are in a marriage or in a monogamous union, then sexual variety seeking may not be appreciated by your spouse, notwithstanding the fact that, of course, people have a penchant for such sexual variety seeking. So I talk about sexual variety seeking, I talk about food variety seeking, I talk about various forms of variety seeking, but the one that I spend the most time on is intellectual variety seeking. Of course, I do that because, I've been a professor for 30 years, so that's the one that is most personally relevant to me. And here I talk about the schism, if you'd like, the tension between the specialist and the generalist, right? So in academia, people are trained to be hyper specialists. You know a lot about a very, very small thing. Now that's fine. In many cases, for you, in order for you to make contributions in a field, you really have to be a specialist. But really, the big thinkers, the ones who crack big scientific problems, are always operating at the intersection of disciplines, right? And that's one of the reasons, by the way, why I say that my biggest hero is Leonardo da Vinci, because Leonardo da Vinci is literally, literally in a temporal sense, he's the Renaissance man, but he is the Renaissance man because he's an anatomist, he's an engineer, he's a futurist, he's a sculptor, he is a painter, right? So he's a scientist. Actually, I just read recently a biography on Leonardo. It's titled Leonardo, the First Scientist by Michael White. I highly recommend it. I mean, I just devoured that biography. I actually have 2 other biographies on Leonardo da Vinci, the most recent of which is the one by Walter Isaacson. Walter Isaacson is the one who also did the recent biography on Elon Musk, who I must say I've become very close with recently. We've become good friends. So in any case, so variety as a spice of life is a very interesting maxim in that for many things in life, you really do need variety. Think about, say, your tourism behavior. You can go every year to that beautiful Jamaican resort that your family loves. And if you go every year there, the water is going to be beautiful and the beach is going to be beautiful. But there are 200 countries in the world, all of which have something unique and magical to offer. Boy, if at the end of your life you could tick off as many of those countries as having seen, experienced, you've interacted with those cultures, well, you're the one who wins at the game of life. And so, yes, there is a balance to be struck between doing something that you love repeatedly, so routinized behavior, and seeking variety. But all other things equal, ceteris paribus, as we say in Latin, variety is indeed the spice of life. Chapter 7 is titled On Persistence and the Anti-Fragility of Failure. Here, what I'm basically arguing is that, look, many of the, well, all of the consequential things in life that you might do that have import, that have meaning, that grant you purpose and meaning, are going to require persistence, doggedness, stick-to-itness, and that you have to be anti-fragile at the prospect of failing. And so it's a really great chapter because it's full of stories of some of our biggest stars in different domains and their stories of rejection and their stories of failure. So let me mention a few. Lionel Messi, right? I adore Lionel Messi, the greatest soccer player of all time. He was told he's too small and too frail to even become a professional soccer player. Not to become the greatest soccer player ever, even to just become a professional. Go, get out of here, kid. Find something else to do. Imagine if he had listened to that advice or that evaluation. Michael Jordan was cut from his sophomore high school team. Imagine that there is a high school coach who looked at Michael Jordan and said that there is someone on that high school team that is better than Michael Jordan. So I should cut Michael Jordan, who becomes the greatest basketball player ever. Zinedine Zidane, the greatest French soccer player of all time, who's won the World Cup, could have played for Algeria by ancestry, or he could have played for France. The Algerian coach looked at him and said, I'm not interested in this guy. He's too slow. He becomes the greatest French player of all time and probably one of the top 5 players of all time, right? J.K. Rowling was rejected by every single publisher until she was famously accepted by that last publisher through the serendipity of her daughter's friend, right? So imagine, had she not, and she was destitute, and she was clinically depressed, and she was nearly homeless, if I remember correctly, and yet look at her today. Steven Spielberg was rejected from the USC Film School not once, not twice, but 3 times, right? So there are people who said, you suck. You will never be a filmmaker. There's no point in us accepting you into our film school. He is the film director of some of the most iconic movies in the history of cinema. So you can't really do anything meaningful in life if you are so fragile to failure, so stunted by the possibility of rejection. Okay. Moving on to chapter 8, it's almost never too late. Eradicate regret. Let me give you here a bit of the framework that shapes that chapter. This is actually from my former professor of psychology at Cornell when I was doing my PhD there, Thomas Gilovich, who, by the way, I was so pleased and honored and proud when I went back last month to Cornell and I gave 2 talks. I gave a talk on the parasitic mind and a talk on global Jew hatred. And in one of the talks, I'm looking around. Who do I see? I see my doctoral supervisor, the one who supervised my doctoral dissertation, Jay Russo, who's a cognitive psychologist. And I see right there in the middle of the room, Thomas Gilovich. Wow. So it was really nice to now be professing in front of my former professors. What a thrill it is to circle of life. In any case, the reason I'm mentioning Thomas Gilovich is because he pioneered something that was known even before he studied it. It's known in many different settings that there is a difference between the regret due to actions versus regret due to inactions. So, for example, if I say, I regret that I was unfaithful in my marriage because that led to my divorce. And so here I'm regretting an action. I regret that I cheated on my wife. Okay. If I regret due to inaction is, I really regret that I never pursued my love of art because I always really wanted to be an artist. I ended up becoming an accountant because my dad was an accountant and his dad was an accountant. And then I suddenly wake up at 55 and it's a perfect prescription for me to have a midlife crisis because I haven't lived an authentic life. So authenticity, as I explained in that chapter, is not just the authenticity and realness in our personal relationship, right? Like you could meet someone, you go, my God, that person was so fake. They were so inauthentic. So, I mean, that's true. We can use the term in that sense. But I mean it in an existential sense. Were you true to yourself, to your passions, to your desires in terms of where you want to contribute in life? And yes, you might become a pediatrician because you come from a long family of physicians, but you realize I only did it because my parents were both physicians. I hate medicine. I always wanted to be an architect. I love aesthetics. I love art. And therefore, I wake up at 55 and I hate that I squandered my life. And it turns out, guys, that when you ask people over the long run, which regrets loom largest? Well, guess what? It's usually regrets due to inaction, not action. And so when students come to me and say, "Hey, professor, I hear that there's a lot of market opportunities if I get a degree in big data analytics. What do you think?" I say, "No, no, 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 no. Don't ask me like that. Yes, there might be big demand for people who know big data analytics or who know how to apply AI and marketing analytics or who know how to develop econometric models to forecast the economy. That's great. But are you passionate about this?" And at first it sounds cliche-ish, right? Because they just want me to say, yeah, yeah, that's a great job opportunity and you'll make a lot of money. So that's not going to bring you happiness. As I explained, by the way, so in the earlier chapter, when I told you chapter 2, I talk about ancient and modern wisdoms regarding the good life. When it comes to some of the contemporary science, what I do in that chapter is I talk about how does our personality affect happiness? How does religiosity affect happiness? How does culture affect happiness? How does money lead to happiness, right? And the answer is no. And by the way, in my recent chat on an X Spaces with Elon Musk, I brought up that point because what better person to bring it up to than the richest person who's ever lived, and he confirmed that no, he's not necessarily infinitely happier than you because he's got 200 plus $1 billion and you don't. I mean, up to a certain point, money can buy you happiness, right? As you can feed your children, you have your basic necessities, you don't have to worry about healthcare, you can take a vacation once a year. The typical study has found that, I mean, of course, you need to maybe change it now because of inflation, but the classic study shows that the inflection point happens at about 75,000. Once you make more than that, you're not really getting much of a bang for your buck. So if you make 200,000 or you make 120, it's not going to necessarily add happiness to your life. And so when someone comes to me and says, "Hey, professor, what do you think? You think I should study behavioral finance? There are really good opportunities at JP Morgan." I go, "No, no, don't ever ask that question. That's a recipe for leading a miserable life." And so in that chapter, I talk about how you can have a mindset that ensures that when you're 85 and looking back at your life, you don't experience regret. After I finish this session where I'm giving you all of this juicy stuff from my book, and I go to Amazon.com and I don't see that a whole bunch of you didn't buy a copy, you would have cheated because that's the social contract. I give you my time, I give you my wisdom, you support those who give it to you. So go out there and order a couple of copies. Don't be parasites. All right, so let's finish with this chapter. I give two examples of, because remember the chapter is titled, "It's Almost Never Too Late." Why did I put almost? Because if today I decide, I really want to pursue my dream of being an NBA player, well, it is too late in this case, right? I'm too old. I'm too short. I mean, yes, there have been actually shorter players than me, not too many. And it's unlikely that a 59-year-old guy is going to make it to the NBA. That train is passed. I'm not going to become a ballerina. Even though I was a phenomenal soccer player, it's too late for me now to go and play for Barcelona. So, but for many, many things, it really is almost never too late. And let me give you two quick stories. I tell two stories. I won't give the whole details away, but I tell two stories of a guy who got his PhD at 91 or 92, and another guy who came on my show. You can go back and watch our show. I think his name is Manfred Steiner, who was an MD, medical doctor, from the 50s, then got a PhD in 1967 in biochemistry, on his way to uh, specializing in hematology, blood disorders. But his love had always been physics. And he had never pursued physics because his family told him, come on, do something serious, do something practical, become a physician. What's this physics bullshit? Well, after he retired from his long, illustrious medical career, he decided, I'm going to pursue my main love. In his 70s, he began his studies in physics, and at the age of 89, finished his PhD in physics and came on my show. You listen to this guy, you go, my God, this guy is Buddha. It's unbelievable, right? 89 years old, he's finishing his PhD. And he's saying, oh, I'm going to now work to try to publish a paper for my doctoral dissertation. He's not doing it because of job opportunities. He's not doing it because he's trying to beef up his CV. He's doing it for the most pure intrinsic reason. He's a true sophist in the sense of the lover of learner, right? Philosophia, to philosophize, to engage knowledge, to engage, right? In Arabic, you say philosoph, like the real sense of philosopher, right? That's why when you get a PhD, it's philosophia doctor, right? You're a philosoph. That's what this guy is. He's doing it for no other purpose than the love of doing it. That's how you should live life. And then finally in chapter 9, don't worry, be happy. I give a couple of examples of stories of people who have found a way to be happy despite the fact that they went through unbelievable circumstances. And so that even when you are faced with trials and tribulations that seem bafflingly cruel, they still found a way to be happy. Don't worry, be happy. So, bottom line, to conclude, the book is a really positive book filled with endless prescriptions on how to live life. I should mention, by the way, I should have maybe mentioned this at the start of the book, at the start of the session. About 50% of our happiness stems from our genes. But the good news is it leaves another 50% up for grabs. So what does that mean? I may have the unique genetic combinations that defines my personhood so that I wake up and I have a sunny disposition. I'm happy. Whereas you have a disposition that's more sullen. Okay, there are individual differences. And as I said, about 50% of our differences stem from our genes. But then if you, who's the sullen one, makes the right decision in your marriage, for example, and me, the sunny one, chooses wrongly, then I may end up being a much more miserable person than you. So, and I basically talk about, speaking of relationships, I talk about research from Harvard, a longitudinal study of more than 8 decades that shows that the number one predictor of happiness and well-being is having tight social relationships, more so than what your cholesterol scores are. It has a greater protection on your heart than your cholesterol scores. Okay, so having meaningful relationships, building strong bonds with people that matter, is certainly a ticket to happiness, as Aristotle already knew several thousand years ago. So there you have it, folks. The sad truth about happiness, 8 secrets for leading the good life. Please get a copy. Please tell others. It's such a fun book. Thank you so much. I know that you could have been many places right now. You chose to be with me for an hour, so I take that very seriously. I thank you for your time. If you wish to ask me questions, please subscribe, and then you can post the question in the thread for today's session. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon. Take care. Ciao.